My name is Helen Wheeler, and I am 70 years old. I am a retired seamstress, a mother and a sister who believed with every fiber of my being that love could hold a family together through anything life might throw at us. For decades, I didn't just stitch fabric together at my sewing machine. I stitched the very bonds that I thought would keep our family whole, strong and united against the world. I gave everything I had to my family, every penny, every ounce of strength, every beat of my heart. When my dear mother began her slow, heartbreaking descent into the fog of dementia, I became her guardian angel, her constant companion, her lifeline to the world she was slowly forgetting. I watched over her day and night, feeding her with patience when she forgot how to eat, holding her trembling hand when she forgot my name, singing the old songs that sometimes brought a flicker of recognition to her clouded eyes. I emptied my life savings, every dollar I had scraped together from 40 years of seamstress work, to fund my nephew Brian's law school education, believing wholeheartedly in his future and his promise to make something of himself. I stood by my troubled daughter Sarah through her darkest hours of addiction, paying for rehab after rehab, never giving up hope, even when everyone else said she was a lost cause. I gave my savings, my health, my sleep, and my very soul to keep our family strong and together. But the day after my mother's funeral, when the grief was still fresh and raw in all our hearts, when the flowers were barely wilted on her grave, my entire world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My sister Margaret flanked like a general by her cold husband Donald, and their calculating daughter Ruth looked me straight in the eye with a hardness I had never seen before, and declared that my adoption meant absolutely nothing, that I had no legal claim, no moral claim, no claim whatsoever to our mother's estate. My nephew Brian, the boy I had put through law school with my own money, the child I had tutored and encouraged and believed in, had forged official documents to exclude me entirely from the family I had served my whole life. Margaret's words cut through me like a blade dipped in poison. "You're not one of us. You never were." Brian's cold addition echoed in my ears like a death sentence. "Stay out of family business. You don't belong here." In that moment, standing in the living room where I had spent countless hours caring for our mother, I felt completely erased from the only family I had ever known. 70 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion dismissed as if they had never happened. Yet as I stood there broken and betrayed beyond measure, something deep inside my soul began to stir. A strength I didn't know I possessed started to awaken. They didn't know about the diary hidden away in my attic, wrapped carefully in tissue paper inside an old cedar chest. Mother's own handwriting shaky but determined, naming me as her beloved daughter and equal heir. This secret would expose their lies and reveal a strength they never knew I possessed. The war they had started was far from over. The next morning, I woke before dawn with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I gathered every ounce of courage I had left in my tired body and drove the familiar route to the family home where I had spent countless hours over the decades. The house where I had changed Margaret's diapers when she was a baby, where I had helped her with homework, where I had nursed our mother through her final illness. The house still carried the lingering scent of Mother's favorite lavender perfume, and for just a moment, standing on that front porch, I could almost pretend she was still there. That this nightmare wasn't real, that we could all sit down together and work this out like the loving family I thought we were. But Margaret's harsh voice shattered that beautiful illusion the moment she opened the door. Her face was like stone cold and unwelcoming, nothing like the little sister who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her eyes cold as winter stone, looking at me as if I were a stranger trying to sell something she didn't want. I thought we made ourselves clear yesterday. Within minutes, the whole gang had assembled, like vultures circling their prey. Brian appeared from the kitchen, his expensive suit, a testament to the education I had funded with my life savings, looking every inch the successful lawyer he had become on my dime. Donald emerged from the den with his newspaper in hand, his face set in lines of disapproval and disgust. Ruth came down the stairs, all of them forming an impenetrable wall of hostility against me, their unified front, making it clear that this had all been planned, orchestrated, rehearsed. Brian produced a manila folder with the theatrical flair of a courtroom lawyer, his voice dripping with false authority and legal jargon designed to intimidate. These documents make it absolutely clear, Helen. You have no legal standing whatsoever in this family's affairs. Your adoption was never properly finalized, and even if it had been, it wouldn't give you any rights to the estate. The papers were crisp and official looking, bearing what I would later discover were forged signatures that excluded me from everything our mother had worked for her entire life. My hands trembled as I looked at them, seeing my life's work, my decades of sacrifice dismissed with fraudulent ink and false seals. But their cruelty was just beginning to show its true face. Margaret's greed emerged like a serpent from its hiding place, ugly and venomous. You need to understand something right now, Helen, she said, her voice taking on a businesslike tone that chilled me to the very bone. That little house of yours, the one you've been living in all these years, it's sitting on family property. Mother always intended it for Brian's future. He's got big plans, important plans, and he needs that land for his law practice expansion. Ruth nodded eagerly, her eyes gleaming with the kind of avarice that makes people do terrible things to their own blood. And those savings you've been hoarding away like some kind of miser, we know all about them. Dad's retirement isn't what it should be, and we have real expenses, family expenses that matter more than your selfish comfort. She emphasized the word real like a slap across my face, making it clear that my needs, my comfort, my very existence didn't qualify as real or important in their eyes. Even in the face of such cruelty, I still harbored hope, clinging to it like a drowning woman clutches driftwood in a storm. Margaret, I pleaded, my voice barely above a whisper, fighting back tears that threatened to overwhelm me. I know you're grieving. We all are. Mother's death has been hard on everyone. Maybe you're under financial pressure. Maybe the stress of her illness and the funeral expenses have been too much. But we're family. We're sisters. We grew up together. We shared the same roof, the same parents. Surely that has to mean something. I reminded her of all the nights I had spent by Mother's bedside during her final months, how I had held her hand during her worst moments when the dementia made her frightened and confused, how I had been there day and night when Margaret was too busy with her own comfortable life to visit. Remember how I used to braid your hair when we were little girls. Remember how I protected you from the older kids at school who tried to bully you. Remember how I taught you to ride your bicycle running alongside you until you found your balance. How can you forget all of that? How can you throw away a lifetime of love and sisterhood? But my words fell on deaf ears, landing like flower petals on concrete. The humiliation that followed was worse than any physical blow they could have delivered. Brian, it turned out, had already begun his systematic campaign of character assassination at our church, the place where I had worshiped faithfully for 40 years, where I had sung in the choir, organized bake sales, and comforted other families in their times of grief. He He had spread vicious lies about my character with the skill of a professional propagandist, calling me a greedy outsider who had manipulated a sick old woman for financial gain. His law school training had taught him exactly how to plant seeds of doubt and suspicion. She's not really family, he told anyone who would listen, his voice full of false sincerity and concern. She's just a manipulative woman trying to steal what rightfully belongs to the biological family. My grandmother was vulnerable, confused, and Helen took advantage of that confusion to worm her way into the will. The congregation members I had known for decades, people I had considered friends, began to look at me with suspicion and whisper behind their hands when I walked by. Women who had shared coffee and conversation with me for years suddenly found excuses to avoid me after church services. Donald joined the attack with the cruel enthusiasm of someone who had always resented my place in the family. "You were always just a seamstress, Helen." He sneered, his voice full of disdain and class prejudice. A woman who worked with her hands, never understanding the bigger picture, never grasping complex family dynamics or financial planning. You're completely irrelevant to this family's legacy and future. Mother took pity on you because she had a soft heart, but that doesn't make you an heir to anything. The demands that followed were not just unreasonable, they were carefully designed to strip me of everything I had worked for my entire life, to leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back. Margaret's voice became sharp and commanding as she laid out their non-negotiable expectations with the precision of a military general. "You need to vacate your house within 30 days. It's going to be sold immediately, and every penny of the proceeds will go to Brian for his law practice expansion and Ruth's children's college funds. You also need to cover all our legal fees for straightening out this mess you've created by fighting us. The lawyers don't work for free, and since you caused this problem, you can pay to fix it." Ruth's demands were even more outrageous, delivered with the entitled tone of someone who had never worked a day in her life. "Those family heirlooms you've been keeping in your house, Mother's jewelry, her china, her photographs, her books, everything that has sentimental value. They all belong to the real family now. Pack them up carefully and bring them here this weekend. And don't even think about keeping even one small piece as a memento or keepsake. You have absolutely no right to our family's treasures." Brian's final demand was the cruelest cut of all, delivered with the cold precision of a lawyer destroying a witness on the stand. "You're going to sign over your pension benefits and Social Security to help settle Mother's estate properly and compensate us for years of expenses. After all, you've been living rent-free on family property for decades. Consider it back payment for your room and board, plus interest." As I drove home that day, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my heart felt like a broken mess of disillusionment and fading hope. The family I had sacrificed everything for, the people I had loved more than my own life, had revealed themselves to be complete strangers. Cold, calculating people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed, a problem to be solved, a burden to be discarded. But somewhere deep inside my chest, beneath all the pain and heartbreak, a tiny flame of resolve began to flicker. They had made a critical error in their calculations. They had underestimated me completely, dismissed me as a harmless old woman who would go quietly into the night. That would prove to be their greatest mistake. The harassment didn't stop with that first brutal confrontation. Like wolves who had tasted blood, they became bolder, more vicious, more demanding with each passing day. The systematic cruelty they unleashed revealed the true depths of their heartlessness, showing me sides of people I thought I knew that were darker than I could have ever imagined. Brian called me at all hours of the day and night, his voice full of the kind of false concern that barely masked his growing demands and threats. "Helen, You need to start pulling your weight around here," he would say during his late-night calls, deliberately timing them to disrupt my sleep. "Mother's gone now, and this family can't afford to carry dead weight anymore. You're going to need to find work, real productive work, to earn your keep in this family if you want to stay connected to us at all." The crushing irony of his words was almost too much to bear. Here was a man whose entire legal education I had funded with my seamstress earnings, telling me I needed to earn my keep at 70 years old with severe arthritis in my hands that made even simple household tasks a daily struggle. The hands that had put him through law school could barely hold a coffee cup without pain, but he expected me to find employment to justify my existence. But the cruelty didn't end with his phone calls. Margaret had already begun her systematic campaign of selling off Mother's precious heirlooms, the very items she had demanded I surrender to the real family. I watched in horror and disbelief as she posted cheerful photos on social media of herself at various antique shops and estate sale companies, proudly displaying the profits she was making from our mother's lifetime collection of treasures. "These dusty old things were just taking up space and collecting dust," she said with casual dismissal when I confronted her about the sales. "At least now they're bringing in some real money for the family, the real family, the one that actually matters." Her voice carried no shame, no regret, only the satisfaction of someone converting sentiment into cash. Ruth supported her mother's actions with the enthusiastic greed of someone who saw dollar signs instead of memories. She even had the audacity to suggest that I should sign over my monthly pension checks to help fund their increasingly expensive lifestyle. "Think of it as paying rent for all those years you lived on family property," she said with a sweet smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes. It was during one of these confrontations that the devastating truth finally hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sitting in my small kitchen, surrounded by photographs of family gatherings where I had always been included, where I had always felt welcomed and loved, I realized that Margaret had never truly seen me as her sister. Not really, not in any way that mattered. To her, I was nothing more than a convenient source of labor and money, a walking ATM machine who had outlived her usefulness now that Mother was gone. All those years of sacrifice, all those nights I had spent caring for our mother while Margaret lived her comfortable, uninterrupted life had meant absolutely nothing to her. I was just the hired help who had foolishly believed she was family. The weight of this realization settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Every smile, every holiday dinner, every birthday card, every moment I had treasured as evidence of our family bond had been nothing more than Margaret's way of keeping me compliant, useful, and willing to sacrifice for her benefit. But the deepest wound, the one that cut straight to my soul, was yet to be revealed. As I sat there drowning in my despair, I remembered the sacrifice that had cost me the most, the one that had changed the entire trajectory of my life. It was Sarah, my troubled daughter who had struggled with drug addiction for years, cycling through periods of sobriety and relapse that had torn my heart into pieces. When Sarah needed help, truly desperate help, that meant the difference between life and death. I had mortgaged my entire future to pay for her treatment. I had delayed my own critical medical care, ignoring the growing constant pain in my arthritic hands, because every single dollar I could scrape together went towards Sarah's recovery programs. I remembered that terrible night when she overdosed, how I had held her unconscious body in the hospital emergency room, promising her through my tears that everything would be all right, that I would find a way to save her, no matter what it cost me. I had sold my mother's engagement ring, the one precious piece of jewelry I had hoped to pass down to Sarah someday, to pay for the expensive treatment center that ultimately saved her life. My hands, once steady and skilled at my sewing machine, had deteriorated rapidly during those months of stress, neglect, and constant worry. The arthritis that I had ignored in favor of Sarah's needs had progressed to the point where I could no longer do the intricate needlework that had been my livelihood, forcing me into an early retirement I couldn't afford. But when I shared this story with Margaret, hoping to help her understand the depth of my sacrifices and the love that had motivated them, her response was pure, concentrated poison. She twisted my greatest act of maternal love into a weapon against me. "That's exactly the problem, Helen," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy and real venom. "You always created drama in this family. Mother was constantly stressed and worried because of Sarah's problems, stressed because of your problems, stressed because you brought chaos and dysfunction into our peaceful family. Your whole presence in this family was disruptive and harmful. If you hadn't been here with all your baggage and drama, maybe Mother would have lived longer and been happier." Brian's reaction was even more cruel, delivered with the calculated precision of a lawyer destroying a witness. "You probably made Sarah's addiction worse with your enabling behavior and your constant rescuing. And now you're trying to use her problems to make yourself look like some kind of hero and martyr. You were always manipulative, Helen, always playing the victim, always making everything about you and your suffering." Their proposed solution to my problem was the final insult delivered with the cold calculation of people disposing of an inconvenient burden. Margaret's voice was businesslike and matter-of-fact as she laid out their plan for my exile. "There's a very nice assisted living facility about an hour away from here. Very affordable, very appropriate for someone in your situation. You can sell your house, use every penny of that money to pay for a few years there, and we'll handle the estate properly without any more interference or drama from you. No more complications, no more family meetings, no more problems." Donald nodded approvingly, clearly having researched this option thoroughly. "Ruth found it online. It's perfect for someone with your limited resources and health issues. They have organized activities, meals provided, and you won't have to worry about maintaining that big house anymore or being a burden on the family." The way he said it made it crystal clear that this wasn't a helpful suggestion, but a non-negotiable ultimatum. Ruth's addition was the cruelest touch of all, delivered with the casual heartlessness of someone disposing of an unwanted pet. "And of course, you'll need to sign over Sarah's trust fund to us for proper management. She's stable now, and we need to make sure family money stays in the real family, managed by people who understand financial responsibility." As I listened to them calmly planning my exile and the theft of my daughter's future security, something fundamental inside me finally snapped. The last vestiges of hope, the final threads of familial love and loyalty were severed completely and permanently. I was no longer their victim, their convenient target, their source of guilt-free exploitation. I was their enemy, and they had just declared war on the wrong woman. The fury that had been building inside me like pressure in a volcano transformed into something far more dangerous. Cold, calculated, methodical resolve. They would learn that dismissing me had been the biggest mistake of their lives. The final devastating blow came exactly 1 week later on a beautiful spring morning that mocked the darkness of what was about to unfold. I was in my small garden, tenderly caring for the roses that Mother and I had planted together 20 years earlier when Margaret and Brian arrived at my home unannounced. There was no pretense of family courtesy this time, No false smiles or hollow greetings, no attempt to soften what they had come to do. They had come like executioners to finish what they had started, to deliver the final blow that would end my life as I knew it. "Pack your things, Helen," Margaret announced, without any preamble, her voice as cold and final as a judge pronouncing a death sentence. "You have exactly 3 days to clear out completely. The realtor is coming on Friday morning to list the house, and we need it empty and ready for showing." Brian stood directly behind her, like an enforcer, his arms crossed, his expensive suit and confident posture making him look every inch the arrogant, successful lawyer he had become with my money. 3 days. I whispered, my hands still dirty from the garden soil, still holding the small trowel I had been using to tend the flowers that held so many precious memories. "Margaret, this is my home. I've lived here for 25 years. This is where I raised Sarah, where I've made my life." "It was never really your home," she replied with crushing finality, her words designed to erase decades of my life and memories. "It was always family property that Mother allowed you to use out of charity and pity. Now it's time for it to serve its real purpose, its intended purpose." She handed me a thick manila envelope with the casual indifference of someone delivering junk mail. "Ruth has filed all the necessary legal paperwork. You're being evicted for non-payment of rent and property taxes that you should have been paying all along. If you're not completely out by Friday at noon, the sheriff will come and physically remove you and everything you own." The breathtaking cruelty and calculation of their plan hit me like a physical assault. They had manufactured an entirely false legal case against me, claiming I owed thousands of dollars in back rent and property taxes that had never existed, that had never been mentioned in 25 years of living here. Ruth had filed fraudulent documents with the court, and they were using the legal system itself to steal my home with a thin veneer of official legitimacy. But even faced with this ultimate betrayal, I wasn't ready to surrender. Every instinct I had as a mother, as a sister, as a human being who had loved and sacrificed for others, compelled me to make one final desperate plea for mercy and recognition of our shared history. I fell to my knees right there in the garden, my hands clasped together in supplication, dirt still under my fingernails, and begged my sister for compassion with every ounce of sincerity and love I had left in my shattered heart. "Margaret, please, I'm begging you to remember who we used to be to each other. I know we've had our differences. I know there's been tension and misunderstandings, but please remember when we were children together. Remember how I used to read to you every night when you were sick with pneumonia and couldn't sleep. Remember how I taught you to ride your bicycle on summer afternoons, running alongside you and holding the seat until you found your balance and could ride on your own. Remember how I protected you from the older boys at school who tried to bully you because you were small for your age. Tears streamed down my weathered face as I poured out every precious memory I could summon, trying desperately to find some remaining spark of the sister I had once known. I held your hand when you were scared of thunderstorms and the dark. I gave you my favorite doll, the one Mama had given me for Christmas, when yours got broken and you cried for hours. I helped you with your homework every single night, even when I was tired from my own schoolwork. I braided your hair for school pictures and church services. How can you forget all of that? How can you throw away an entire lifetime of love and sisterhood and shared memories? Margaret's response was swift, brutal, and final. She pulled out her phone with the casual indifference of someone checking the weather, typed something quickly, and then held the screen in front of my face. 4 words that destroyed the last fragile hope in my heart. "You're dead to us." The message was crystal clear. I was no longer family, no longer worthy of consideration or basic human decency. I was dead to them, erased from their lives, as if I had never existed. But the campaign of cruelty wasn't finished. The next morning, I discovered that my mailbox had been vandalized during the night. Brian had spray painted the word outsider across it in blood red letters, the paint still dripping like fresh wounds. The message was unmistakable. I didn't belong here. I never had belonged here, and I never would belong anywhere in their world. But the final betrayal, the one that nearly destroyed what remained of my sanity and will to live, came from the person I least expected, the one person I thought would always stand by me, no matter what. Sarah, my daughter, the child I had saved from the depths of addiction, called me that afternoon. Her voice was cold and distant, nothing like the grateful, loving woman who had hugged me tightly after her last successful stint in rehabilitation. Mom, I've been having long conversations with Aunt Margaret and Brian. They've explained the whole situation to me, helped me understand what's really been going on. I think you're being incredibly selfish and greedy, hoarding family money that could help all of us build better lives. You need to stop being so stubborn and possessive and start thinking about what's best for everyone, not just yourself. My own daughter, the child I had sacrificed everything to save, had been turned against me by their lies and manipulations. The pain was beyond description, beyond anything I had ever experienced. It felt like my heart was being ripped from my chest while I was still alive to feel every tear. But in that moment of absolute darkness, when I felt like I had nothing left to lose, when they had taken everything from me, including my own child's love, the words came pouring out of me like water from a burst dam. All the pain, all the anger, all the secret knowledge I had carefully guarded for so long exploded in a torrent of truth that would change everything forever. You want to know what Mother really thought of me? I screamed into the phone, my voice carrying decades of suppressed hurt and rage, knowing that Brian was listening on the other end, probably recording every word. You want to know the real truth about this family and who belongs where? Go to my attic right now. Go to the old cedar chest under the east window, the one where I keep the Christmas decorations. Look inside the blue photo album behind the pictures of your wedding day, Margaret. You'll find Mother's diary, the one she kept faithfully during her last year of life. My voice grew stronger and more powerful as I continued feeling a surge of vindication and strength I hadn't experienced in months. She wrote in it, every single day, Margaret, every day for an entire year, how grateful she was that I was there to care for her when she needed it most. How ashamed she was that her biological daughter was too busy with her comfortable life to visit more than once a month. How she lay awake at night planning to leave me equal shares in everything because I was the daughter who actually showed up, who actually cared, who loved her without conditions or expectations of reward. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear Brian's sharp intake of breath, could imagine Margaret's face going white with shock and growing fear. She wrote about you too, Margaret. She wrote about how you only called when you needed money for something. She wrote about how you complained to your friends that she was taking too long to die and becoming a burden on your busy social schedule. She wrote about how you made her feel guilty and unwanted when she was at her most vulnerable and frightened. It's all there in her own shaky handwriting, dated and signed on every single page. My voice broke with the weight of emotion, but I pressed on, relentlessly determined to deliver every painful truth I had been carrying. She wrote that she loved me like the daughter she had always wanted, the daughter she had prayed for. She wrote that she was deeply ashamed that her biological daughter had become someone she barely recognized, someone cold and selfish and cruel. She wrote that I was her real family, not because of blood or legal documents, but because of love, sacrifice, and genuine caring. The line went dead with a sharp click, but I knew the message had been delivered with devastating impact. Margaret would find that Diary would read those words in our mother's familiar handwriting and would know that everything she had built her case on was not just wrong, but completely backwards. Mother had known exactly what she was doing when she planned her estate, exactly who deserved what, and she had chosen love over biology, devotion over DNA. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than crushing despair flowing through my veins. I felt the sweet, fierce satisfaction of truth finally being spoken of, secrets finally being revealed of justice, beginning its slow but inevitable march. They had pushed me too far, underestimated me too completely, and now they would face the consequences of their systematic cruelty. The war they had started was far from over, but I had just fired the shot that would change everything. The tide was about to turn, and they had no idea what was coming for them. In the hours that followed my explosive revelation about Mother's diary, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: absolute clarity. The fog of confusion, hurt, and self-doubt that had clouded my mind since Mother's funeral lifted completely, replaced by a crystalline determination that surprised even me. I was no longer the broken, pleading woman who had begged for scraps of affection from people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient target for their greed. I picked up my phone and called Margaret one final time. When she answered, her voice was shaky, uncertain, in a way I had never heard before. She had found the diary. She had read Mother's words. She knew the truth now, and that knowledge had shaken her to her very core. "Helen," she began, her voice carrying a tremor of fear that gave me deep satisfaction. "We need to talk about this diary situation. Maybe we can work something out, find a compromise that works for everyone." "No, Margaret," I said, my voice steady and calm as mountain stone. "We're done talking. We're done negotiating. We're done pretending to be family. You made your choice when you threw me out like garbage. You chose greed over love, money over family cruelty, over compassion. Now you're going to face the consequences of that choice, and I'm going to reclaim everything that was rightfully mine." I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone who had finally realized the magnitude of their mistake. "Helen, you can't be serious. You don't have the resources to fight us. You don't have lawyers or money or connections. You're just a seamstress." "You're right about one thing, Margaret. I was just a seamstress. But I was also Mother's chosen daughter, the one she trusted with her most precious secrets. And you have no idea what else I know, what other evidence I have, or how far I'm willing to go to get justice." My voice carried a steel that surprised even me. "You're not my family anymore. You're not my sister. You're just another person who tried to steal from me, and I don't let thieves win." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret had expected tears, pleading, perhaps even a pathetic attempt at reconciliation. She had not expected this transformed version of me, this woman who had found her backbone and her voice. But my transformation had only just begun. Margaret and Brian, still clinging to their arrogant assumptions about my powerlessness, made the fatal error of dismissing my newfound resolve as nothing more than the desperate posturing of a defeated old woman. "She's lost her mind," Brian told Ruth during a family meeting I would later learn about. "Stress has made her delusional. She probably doesn't even remember what's real anymore. We just need to wait for her to calm down and accept reality." Ruth joined in their mockery with the cruel enthusiasm of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. What's she going to do, sue us with her sewing money, take us to court with her Social Security checks? She's pathetic. She'll be back begging for our forgiveness within a week. They could not have been more wrong. Instead of collapsing under the weight of their continued cruelty, I found strength in my anger, purpose in my pain. I stopped trying to contact Margaret. I stopped pleading for recognition or reconciliation. I stopped being the victim they expected me to remain. Instead, I joined the Community Garden Project at our local church, a group of dedicated volunteers who were working to create a healing space for people dealing with loss and trauma. The irony was not lost on me. While my biological family was trying to destroy me, I found real family among strangers who welcomed me with open arms. The garden became my sanctuary, my place of rebirth and renewal. Working in the soil, nurturing new life from seeds, I began to nurture the new life growing within myself. My hands, still painful from arthritis, found purpose in planting and tending. My heart, still wounded from betrayal, found healing in the acceptance and friendship of people who valued kindness over blood relation. Before I left the family home, for what I knew would be the last time I placed a single white envelope on Margaret's front door, inside was a note written in my careful handwriting. The truth has a way of surfacing, just like weeds in an untended garden. Your lies will unravel one thread at a time. You chose this path, now walk it. But Margaret and her family were not finished with their campaign of intimidation and threats. Brian, his lawyer's training finally kicking in, began making ominous calls about having me declared mentally incompetent. She's clearly suffering from some kind of breakdown, he told anyone who would listen, making up stories about secret diaries, claiming our deceased grandmother said things she never said. We might need to have her committed for her own safety. The threats escalated when Sarah, completely poisoned against me by their lies, called to deliver what she clearly thought would be the final blow to my resistance. Mom, you're embarrassing yourself and our family with these crazy stories. You're abandoning me when I need you most, just like you always do when things get difficult. You're being selfish and cruel, and I don't know if I can forgive you for choosing your pride over your own daughter. But her words, which once would have shattered my resolve, now only strengthened it. I had finally learned to recognize manipulation even when it came wrapped in the voice of my own child. Sarah was no longer the grateful daughter I had saved from addiction. She was another weapon in Margaret's arsenal, another tool being used to break me down and force my surrender. Sarah, I said calmly, my voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who has finally learned their own worth. I raised you to be better than this. I sacrificed everything to give you a chance at life, and you're using that life to hurt me in ways that would have been impossible if I hadn't saved you first. When you're ready to remember who actually loved you, who actually showed up for you when you needed help, you know where to find me. I hung up the phone and blocked her number, just as I had blocked Margaret's and Brian's. The emotional umbilical cords that had once connected me to my abusers were finally severed. I was free, and that freedom felt like being able to breathe again after nearly drowning. For the first time in months, I felt the sweet sensation of liberation flowing through my veins. I was no longer bound by their expectations, no longer held hostage by their approval or disapproval. I had found my strength, my voice, my purpose. Justice was beginning to unfold slowly but surely, and I was no longer its victim, but its agent. My transformation within the garden community happened faster than I could have imagined. As I shared my story with the other volunteers, carefully omitting the most painful details, but explaining my situation as a senior citizen facing family rejection and financial abuse, something remarkable occurred. These people, most of them strangers, just weeks before, rallied around me with a fierce protectiveness that my own blood family had never shown. Among them was Ellen Morrison, a retired family law attorney who had joined the Garden Project after her husband's death. Ellen was a sharp, silver-haired woman in her mid-60s with keen eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for taking on cases that others considered unwinnable. When she heard my story, particularly the parts about forged documents and fraudulent legal filings, her professional instincts immediately kicked into high gear. "Helen," she said one afternoon, as we worked side by side planting tomatoes, "what you're describing isn't just morally wrong, it's criminally fraudulent. Those forged signatures, the false eviction paperwork, the manufactured debt claims, that's serious legal misconduct. If you're willing to fight this, I'd be honored to help you challenge every single document they've filed." For the first time in months, I felt hope stirring in my chest, like a seedling breaking through hard soil. Ellen's offer wasn't just legal assistance. It was validation that I wasn't crazy, wasn't wrong, wasn't the troublemaker Margaret had painted me to be. I was a victim of systematic fraud, and there were people willing to help me fight back. But Ellen's support was just the beginning. The Garden Project itself became my pathway to reclaiming not just my legal rights, but my standing in the community. When the project coordinator announced that we needed someone to lead our expansion initiative to help secure funding and community support for a larger healing garden, the group unanimously nominated me. "Helen has the vision, the dedication, and the heart for this work," said Father Martinez, the priest, who had originally proposed the garden. "She understands what it means to heal from trauma, and she has the organizational skills to make this dream a reality." Suddenly, I found myself in a position of respect and authority that I hadn't held in years. The Community Garden Initiative became my platform, my chance to demonstrate that I was far from the helpless, confused old woman Margaret had tried to portray me as. I threw myself into the work with passionate determination, organizing fundraising events, writing grant applications, and building coalitions of support throughout our small town. The irony was delicious. While Margaret and her family were busy destroying my reputation within our extended family, I was building a new reputation based on genuine accomplishment and community service. The very qualities that had made me a devoted caregiver, my attention to detail, my ability to organize and nurture my deep empathy for others' pain, now made me an effective community leader. Our first major fundraising event was scheduled for a Saturday evening in late spring. The entire town was invited to attend our Seeds of Hope garden party, where we would present our expansion plans and ask for community support. I had worked for weeks preparing my presentation, and I was both nervous and excited about the opportunity to share our vision with potential donors and supporters. I should have known that Margaret's family wouldn't let such an opportunity pass without trying to sabotage it. As I was greeting guests and ensuring everything was running smoothly, I spotted a familiar figure near the registration table. Ruth, dressed in her finest clothes and wearing a smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes, was working the crowd with the practiced charm of someone soliciting donations for her own cause. My stomach clenched as I realized what she was doing. Ruth had positioned herself as a representative of some vague family charity work, clearly trying to intercept donations that were meant for our garden project. She was using my own event, my own hard work, as a platform to enhance her own social standing and financial benefit. The confrontation was inevitable. When Ruth spotted me across the room, Her false smile widened into something that looked more like a predator's grin. She made her way through the crowd with deliberate purpose, clearly intending to create a scene that would undermine my credibility and authority. "Well, well," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear her voice dripping with false sweetness and real malice. "If it isn't Helen, the woman who's been telling everyone she's some kind of victim. How nice to see you playing dress-up as a community leader." Several guests turned to watch our interaction, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Ruth clearly intended to use their attention to maximum advantage. "I hope everyone here knows the real story about Helen," she continued, her voice carrying across the room with practiced projection. "She's not actually a legitimate heir to anything, despite what she might have told you. She's a fake someone who's been spreading lies about her family to gain sympathy and donations. She's using your kind hearts to fund her own personal vendetta against the people who were generous enough to take care of her for years." The crowd was listening now, murmurs of confusion and concern rippling through the gathered guests. Ruth was clearly enjoying her moment of power, her chance to destroy my reputation in front of the entire community. "She's not fit to lead anything." Ruth continued, her voice growing bolder as she sensed the crowd's uncertainty. "She's mentally unstable, vindictive, and completely unqualified to handle other people's money. Ask her about the forged documents she's been waving around, claiming they prove she's entitled to things that belong to other people." For a moment, I felt the old familiar fear rising in my throat, the urge to flee, to hide, to accept the shame and humiliation she was trying to heap on me. But then I looked around at the faces of the people who had worked beside me for months, who had seen my dedication and integrity firsthand, who had trusted me with their hopes for healing and community building. Ellen was standing near the microphone, ready to introduce me for my presentation. Father Martinez was at the back of the room, his eyes filled with concern, but also with confidence in my character. The other garden volunteers were scattered throughout the crowd, all of them looking at me with expressions of support and encouragement. I realized that Ruth had made a crucial tactical error. She had chosen to attack me not in isolation, where her lies might have gone unchallenged, but in front of people who actually knew me, who had worked with me, who had seen the evidence of my character through my actions rather than through someone else's accusations. I walked to the microphone with steady steps, my heart pounding, but my purpose clear. When I began to speak, my voice was calm, confident, and filled with the quiet authority that comes from knowing you're standing on solid ground. Thank you all for coming tonight to support our Seeds of Hope Garden expansion. I began looking directly at Ruth as I spoke. This project represents something very important to all of us. The belief that healing is possible, that growth can come from the most difficult circumstances, and that community support can help anyone overcome the effects of betrayal and abuse. I paused, letting my words sink in before continuing. Some of you may not know that this garden project saved my life at a time when my own family was trying to destroy it. When people I trusted tried to steal my inheritance forged legal documents and have me declared incompetent, this community welcomed me and gave me a chance to prove my worth through my actions rather than my bloodline. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Ruth's face had gone pale as she realized that her attack had backfired spectacularly. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that our grant application has been successful. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. The Healing Gardens Foundation has awarded us $25,000 to expand our facility and create a model program that can be replicated in communities throughout the state. The applause was thunderous, drowning out whatever Ruth might have tried to say in response. I had not only defended myself against her attack, but had delivered news that made her shallow, self-serving pitch look pathetic by comparison. As the crowd surged forward to congratulate me and learn more about our expansion plans, I caught a glimpse of Ruth slipping out the back door, her face red with humiliation and rage. The first battle in our public war had been fought and won, but I knew it was far from over. The success of our fundraising event and the community's overwhelming support for the garden project gave me something I hadn't possessed in months' leverage. Ruth's clumsy attempt to sabotage my reputation had backfired so spectacularly that she had actually strengthened my position within the community while exposing her own malicious character to dozens of witnesses. But I wasn't content to simply survive her attack. I had learned that defensive measures weren't enough when dealing with people who were determined to destroy you. If I wanted to protect myself and ensure my family couldn't continue their campaign of harassment and fraud, I needed to go on the offensive. Ellen, ever the strategic thinker, helped me understand exactly how to use the platform I had built. "Helen," she said during one of our planning meetings, "you now have credibility, community support, and documented evidence of their fraudulent behavior. It's time to expose them publicly and make it impossible for them to continue their attacks." The next town council meeting provided the perfect opportunity. As the newly appointed coordinator of the expanded garden project, I was invited to present an update on our progress and our plans for the grant money. But I had a more ambitious agenda than simply discussing flowers and vegetables. I had spent weeks gathering evidence of Ruth's defamatory statements, including recordings of her accusations at the fundraising event and testimony from witnesses who had heard her spreading lies about my mental state and legal standing. Ellen had helped me prepare a presentation that would systematically expose Ruth's pattern of harassment while demonstrating my own credibility and competence. When I took the podium at the town council meeting, Ruth was sitting in the third row, clearly expecting another opportunity to disrupt my presentation and undermine my authority. She had brought reinforcements, this time several of her social circle friends, who had been recruited to support her version of events. I began with my garden project update, detailing our accomplishments and outlining our expansion plans. The council members were clearly impressed with our progress and our professional approach to community development. But then I shifted to the real purpose of my presentation. "Unfortunately," I said, my voice taking on a more serious tone, "our project has faced some challenges that I believe the council should be aware of. There have been deliberate attempts to sabotage our work and spread false information about our leadership and our financial integrity." I presented the evidence, methodically playing recordings of Ruth's public accusations and presenting written statements from witnesses who had heard her spreading lies about me throughout the community. The council members listened with growing concern as the pattern of harassment became clear. "These attacks," I continued, "are not random acts of malice. They are part of a coordinated campaign by certain family members who are angry that I have refused to be intimidated by their threats and their attempts to defraud me of my inheritance." Ruth's face was growing redder by the minute. She was clearly struggling to maintain her composure as her own words were played back to the council and the assembled community members. When I finished my presentation, she leapt to her feet with the desperate fury of someone whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling. "This is exactly what I've been trying to warn people about," she shouted, her voice shrill with panic and rage. "She's completely delusional. She's fabricated this entire adoption story for attention and sympathy. She's mentally unstable and shouldn't be trusted with anyone's money or community projects. The council chamber erupted in murmurs of shock and disapproval. Ruth's outburst was so inappropriate, so clearly unhinged, that she had destroyed any remaining credibility she might have had. But I wasn't finished with her yet. "I'm glad Ruth has chosen to speak," I said calmly, returning to the microphone, "because I have something else to share with the council." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the room's audio system. This is a recording of a phone conversation Ruth had with a mutual acquaintance just last week, where she admits to spreading lies about me. Ruth's voice filled the chamber, captured in crystal clarity, as she bragged about her campaign to destroy my reputation. "The old bat actually believes she belongs in this family," her recorded voice said with cruel laughter. "I've been telling everyone who will listen that she's losing her mind making up stories about secret diaries and inheritance rights. By the time I'm done with her, no one in this town will trust her with organizing a bake sale, let alone handling grant money." The silence that followed was deafening. Ruth's face had gone from red to pale white as she realized that her own words had just destroyed her completely. The council members were looking at her with expressions of disgust and disappointment. Ellen, who had been sitting quietly in the audience, stood up and addressed the council. "As a retired attorney, I want to confirm that I have reviewed the evidence Helen has presented tonight. The documents supporting her inheritance claim are legitimate, and the pattern of harassment she has described constitutes both defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress." The council's response was swift and decisive. The chairwoman looked directly at Ruth and said, "Ms. Carter, based on what we've heard tonight, I think it would be best if you refrained from attending future council meetings until this matter is resolved. Your behavior tonight has been completely inappropriate." But the community's reaction was even more powerful than the council's official response. As Ruth tried to leave the chamber, she was met with cold stares and whispered comments from people who had once considered her a respectable member of their social circle. Her attempt to destroy me had backfired so completely that she had become a social pariah in her own community. The final blow came as she reached the door. Ellen approached her with a manila envelope and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Ms. Carter, you're being served with a defamation lawsuit. Your lies and harassment have caused substantial damage to my client's reputation and emotional well-being, and we intend to seek full compensation through the courts." Ruth's face crumpled as she realized that her war against me had just escalated beyond her ability to control. She had lost her social standing, her community credibility, and now faced serious legal consequences for her actions. As she fled the chamber in tears, I felt the deep satisfaction of justice finally being served. The other council members and community members approached me after the meeting with expressions of support and apology for what I had endured. Helen, the council chairwoman, said, "I want you to know that this community stands behind you completely. What you've accomplished with the garden project and the grace you've shown in dealing with these attacks shows us exactly the kind of leader we want representing us." The aftermath of Ruth's public humiliation sent shockwaves through Margaret's family that I could feel even from a distance. For weeks I heard nothing from any of them, and I began to hope that perhaps they had finally learned the consequences of their actions and would leave me in peace. But I should have known that Margaret's pride and desperation would never allow her to accept defeat gracefully. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing grant applications for our next garden expansion phase. Margaret's voice was tight with barely controlled fury, but I could also hear something else underneath the anger fear. Real fear, perhaps, for the first time in her privileged life. "Helen, She began without any pretense of civility. What you did to Ruth was unconscionable. You've destroyed a young woman's reputation and social standing over some petty family squabble. I'm calling to demand that you drop this ridiculous lawsuit immediately and stop spreading lies about our family. The irony of her words was breathtaking. Margaret, who had spent months trying to destroy my reputation, steal my inheritance, and have me declared mentally incompetent, was now playing the victim because her daughter had faced consequences for her own malicious actions. Margaret, I replied, my voice calm and steady as deep water. Ruth destroyed her own reputation by choosing to wage a public campaign of lies and harassment against me. I didn't make her stand up in a town council meeting and embarrass herself. I didn't force her to brag about spreading defamatory stories. She did all of that herself. But you recorded her, Margaret protested, her voice rising with indignation. You set her up. You're vindictive and cruel, and you're tearing this family apart over money. I felt a laugh bubbling up from deep in my chest, not a sound of humor, but of amazement at her complete lack of self-awareness. I'm tearing the family apart. Margaret, you threw me out of my own home. You forged legal documents to steal my inheritance. You turned my own daughter against me with lies. You declared me dead to you and had your son vandalize my property. And now you want to lecture me about family unity. The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had changed. The righteous anger was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. Helen, we need to put this behind us. Our family can't survive this kind of public scandal. People are talking, asking questions about the estate, about Mother's will. If this continues, everyone will know our business. There it was, the real reason for her call. Margaret wasn't concerned about Ruth's feelings or family relationships. She was worried about exposure, about the community discovering the full extent of their fraudulent actions. The public humiliation at the town council meeting had been just the beginning, and she was terrified of what might come next. That's your problem now, Margaret, I said, my voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had finally learned their own power. You chose greed over family love. You chose cruelty over compassion. You chose lies over truth. Now you get to face the consequences of those choices, and I'm no longer interested in protecting you from them. But Margaret wasn't ready to accept defeat. Her voice shifted again, taking on the wheedling, manipulative tone I remembered from our childhood when she wanted something she couldn't get through direct demands. Helen, please. Think about what Mother would have wanted. She wouldn't have wanted us fighting like this, destroying each other over money and property. We're the only family we have left. Can't we find a way to work this out, to forgive and move forward together? The manipulation was so transparent, so calculated, that it was almost insulting. After months of being told I was dead to them, of being called a fake and a fraud, Margaret expected me to believe that she suddenly cared about family unity and Mother's wishes. Don't you dare invoke Mother's memory to justify your greed, I said, my voice sharp with controlled anger. You know exactly what Mother wanted because she wrote it down in her own handwriting. She wanted me to be treated as her daughter, her equal heir, her beloved child. You chose to ignore her wishes and forge documents to steal what she intended for me. But, Helen, Margaret continued, her voice taking on a note of false vulnerability, we're in real financial trouble. The legal fees, the business investments that didn't work out Ruth's situation now. We need help, and you're the only one who might be able to. I mean, if you have access to resources we don't know about. And there it was, the real purpose of her call. Margaret had finally realized that I wasn't the helpless, penniless victim they had assumed me to be. The success of the garden project, the community support, the legal representation. It all suggested that I had access to resources and connections they hadn't known about. She wasn't calling to reconcile. She was calling to probe for information about my financial situation and to position herself for another attempt at exploitation. The calculation behind her fake concern was so obvious, so pathetic, that I felt nothing but cold disgust for the woman who had once been my sister. "Margaret," I said, my voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence, "let me make something absolutely clear. You are no sister of mine. A sister doesn't try to steal her siblings' inheritance. A sister doesn't forge legal documents to defraud family members. A sister doesn't encourage her children to harass and humiliate someone she claims to love." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in completely. "You chose to see me as an enemy, as an obstacle to your greed. Fine, that's exactly what I am now. But I'm an enemy you created through your own cruelty, and I'm an enemy you are completely unprepared to face. Helen, please don't do this." Margaret's voice was breaking now, the mask of manipulation finally slipping to reveal genuine panic underneath. "We can work something out. We can share the estate, find a compromise. I'll make Ruth apologize, make her drop her campaign against you. We can be family again." "No," I said, simply, my voice as final as a door slamming shut. "We can't. You killed our family relationship when you chose money over love. You killed it when you threw me out like garbage. You killed it when you turned my own daughter against me. It's dead, Margaret, and you're the one who killed it." I hung up the phone and immediately called Ellen. "I need you to file for a restraining order," I told her. "I want a legal document that prevents any member of Margaret's family from contacting me, coming to my home, or interfering with my community activities." "Consider it done," Ellen replied. "And Helen, I'm proud of you. You've handled this with more grace and strength than most people could manage." As I sat in my quiet house that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete peace. The emotional chains that had bound me to my abusers were finally broken. I was free to build the life I wanted, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide them. The phone rang several times that night, Margaret's number appearing on the caller ID, but I had blocked it just as I had blocked all the others. Their voices, their demands, their manipulations could no longer reach me. I had found my strength, my worth, and my boundaries, and I would never again allow anyone to cross them. The war was nearly over, and I had won. 3 months had passed since my final confrontation with Margaret, 3 months of blessed peace and growing success with our community garden project. The restraining order had worked perfectly, creating a legal barrier that finally gave me the space to breathe, to heal, and to build the life I had always deserved. Our garden expansion was thriving. The grant money was being used exactly as promised, and my reputation in the community had never been stronger. I should have known that this period of tranquility was too good to last. Margaret's family had been silent for so long that I had begun to hope they had finally accepted defeat and moved on with their lives. But I had underestimated their capacity for desperate, destructive behavior when cornered. The town hall meeting was supposed to be a celebration, a chance for me to present our garden project's first-year accomplishments to the broader community and discuss our plans for creating similar healing spaces in neighboring towns. The auditorium was packed with supporters, local officials, and representatives from other communities who were interested in replicating our success. I was halfway through my presentation describing how our therapeutic gardening program had helped dozens of people work through grief, trauma, and loss when I noticed a commotion near the back of the room. Brian had entered without invitation, his expensive suit looking somewhat rumpled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They burned with the desperate fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. He didn't wait for an appropriate moment to speak or follow any of the normal protocols for public meetings. Instead, he strode down the center aisle like an avenging angel, his voice booming across the auditorium before he even reached the front. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced his lawyer's training, evident in his commanding presence. "I need to stop this presentation because you're all being deceived by a woman who has built her entire reputation on lies and forgery." The room fell silent, shocked by the interruption and the serious nature of his accusations. I felt my heart skip a beat, but I forced myself to remain calm, to stay focused on the bigger picture. Brian was clearly making a last-ditch effort to destroy my credibility, and I needed to be ready for whatever he was planning to unleash. This woman, he continued, pointing directly at me with theatrical precision, claims to be the beloved adopted daughter of my grandmother, but that's a complete fabrication. She has forged documents, including a so-called diary, to support her fraudulent claims to an inheritance that rightfully belongs to my family. She's a con artist who has manipulated this entire community with sob stories and fake evidence. Brian pulled out his phone and began live streaming clearly, intending to broadcast his attack to as wide an audience as possible. His voice grew more confident as he warmed to his theme, using all of his courtroom skills to present a compelling case against me. My grandmother never adopted this woman. She was simply a caretaker who was paid for her services, nothing more. When my grandmother died, this woman saw an opportunity to steal from grieving family members by fabricating an elaborate story about secret diaries and hidden inheritance rights. She's not a victim. She's a predator who targets vulnerable families during their most difficult times. The impact of his words was immediate and devastating. The audience, many of whom didn't know me personally, but were impressed by my professional presentation and community credentials, began to murmur among themselves. Brian's legal background gave his accusations a weight and authority that my gentle grandmother-like appearance couldn't match. I watched in growing horror as doubt spread through the crowd like wildfire. People who had been nodding approvingly at my presentation just minutes before were now looking at me with suspicion and concern. The town council members were whispering urgently among themselves, clearly wondering if they had been supporting a fraud. "She's stolen thousands of dollars in grant money." Brian continued, his voice growing more passionate as he sensed the crowd's shifting mood. "Money that was supposed to help real community projects, not fund her personal vendetta against the family that was generous enough to care for her. This entire garden project is built on lies, and you've all been taken in by a master manipulator." The humiliation was crushing, more intense than anything I had experienced during the worst days of my family's betrayal. At least then the attacks had been private, limited to people who already knew our family dynamics. This was public destruction on a massive scale, broadcast live to anyone who cared to watch, potentially destroying not just my reputation, but the garden project that had become my life's work. But as I stood there, absorbing the full force of Brian's attack, feeling the weight of public scorn and disapproval pressing down on me like a physical burden, something unexpected happened. Instead of crumbling under the pressure, I found myself growing calmer, more focused, more determined than ever before. I realized that Brian had made a critical tactical error. In his desperation to destroy me, he had chosen to make his attack in front of Ellen, in front of the town council members who had seen the evidence against Ruth, in front of community members who had worked closely with me for months and knew my character firsthand. Most importantly, he had given me the perfect platform to present my evidence to the widest possible audience. Ellen, sitting in the front row, caught my eye and nodded slightly. She had been preparing for exactly this moment, gathering and organizing documentation that would not only refute Brian's lies, but expose the full extent of his family's fraudulent behavior. I stepped back to the microphone, my hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. When I spoke, my voice was calm and clear, carrying the quiet authority of someone who has nothing to hide and nothing to fear from the truth. Thank you, Brian. I said my words carrying across the suddenly quiet auditorium. I've been waiting for this opportunity to address your family's lies in a public forum, and fortunately, I've brought exactly the evidence needed to expose the truth about who the real fraud is in this situation. The audience leaned forward, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Brian's confident expression began to falter as he realized that I wasn't cowering or fleeing as he had expected. Instead, I was preparing to fight back with everything I had, and I had more ammunition than he could possibly have imagined. Ellen rose from her seat and joined me at the front of the auditorium, carrying a briefcase that I knew contained months of careful documentation and evidence gathering. Her presence alone lent credibility to whatever I was about to present, but I could see that Brian still believed his legal training and commanding presence would carry the day. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady and clear. Brian has accused me of forging my mother's diary to support fraudulent inheritance claims. I'd like you to see the actual diary and judge for yourselves whether it's genuine. Ellen opened her briefcase and handed me a carefully preserved leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with the distinctive handwriting that anyone who had known my mother would immediately recognize. But more than that, she also produced a folder containing official documentation that would put Brian's lies to rest once and for all. This diary was written in my mother's hand during the last year of her life. I continued opening it to pages I had marked with ribbon bookmarks. But more importantly, I have here the official adoption papers that were filed when I was 12 years old, along with witness statements from people who were present during the legal proceedings. I began reading from the diary, my mother's own words filling the auditorium with their simple, heartfelt truth. Helen sat with me again today during my worst spell. Margaret hasn't called in 2 weeks, but Helen is here every day making sure I take my medicine, helping me remember who I am when the fog gets too thick. She is more my daughter than the one who came from my body. The audience was silent now, hanging on every word as I continued to read passages that detailed my mother's growing appreciation for my care and her growing disappointment in Margaret's absence. But the most damaging entries were the ones that mentioned Brian specifically. Brian called today asking about money again. He doesn't ask how I'm feeling or whether I need anything. He just wants to know about my finances and when I plan to update my will. Helen would never treat me like a bank account. She loves me for who I am, not for what I can give her. Brian's face was growing pale as he realized the implications of what was being read. These weren't forged documents or fabricated stories. They were his grandmother's own words, written in her distinctive handwriting, describing exactly the kind of person he was and the kind of person I was. But Ellen wasn't finished. She stepped forward and addressed the audience directly, her legal training evident in her clear, authoritative presentation. As a retired family law attorney, I've had these documents examined by handwriting experts and forensic specialists. The diary is absolutely genuine, written in the hand of Helen's adoptive mother over the course of 13 months. But more than that, I have the official adoption decree witnessed and notarized that legally made Helen this woman's daughter with all the rights and privileges that entails. She held up the official documents, allowing the town council members and other community leaders to examine them closely. What we have here is not fraud on Helen's part, but systematic fraud on the part of Brian's family. They forged eviction notices, manufactured debt claims, and filed false legal documents to try to steal an inheritance that legally and morally belonged to Helen. The shift in the audience's mood was swift and dramatic. The murmurs of doubt and suspicion that had greeted Brian's accusations were replaced by expressions of outrage and support for me. People who had worked with me in the garden project stood up to offer their own testimony about my character and integrity. Father Martinez took the microphone briefly to add his voice to my defense. I've worked closely with Helen for over a year now. She has never asked for anything for herself, never taken a penny of compensation for her work, and has shown nothing but complete transparency in how she handles community resources. The idea that she would forge documents or lie about her family history is completely inconsistent with everything I know about her character. But the most powerful moment came when I turned to face Brian, directly looking him in the eye as I delivered the truth that would destroy his credibility completely. Brian, I said, my voice carrying across the auditorium, you've accused me of forging my mother's diary to steal from your family, but I have something else to share with this community. Ellen has recordings of conversations between you and your mother discussing how to manufacture evidence against me and have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my property without legal consequences. Ellen activated her phone's speaker system, and Brian's own voice filled the auditorium, captured in crystal clear audio as he discussed the details of their fraudulent scheme. The old woman is too trusting to see it coming. We just need to make her look crazy, get her declared incompetent, and then we can handle the estate however we want. The reaction was explosive. The audience erupted in expressions of disgust and outrage, and I could see several people recording the moment on their phones, ensuring that Brian's confession would be preserved and shared far beyond this room. Brian's face went from pale to gray as he realized that his own words had just destroyed him completely. The confident, commanding presence he had brought to his attack on me crumbled into something desperate and pathetic. That recording is illegal, he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. You can't use that in court. That's entrapment. Actually, Ellen replied calmly, the recording was made by someone you tried to recruit into your conspiracy, someone who was so appalled by your plans that they came forward to warn Helen. It's completely legal and completely admissible in the criminal charges we'll be filing against you for fraud and conspiracy. The crowd's condemnation was swift and merciless. People who had initially been swayed by Brian's legal credentials now saw him for what he truly was, a manipulative criminal who had tried to destroy an innocent woman for financial gain. Several community members approached me to apologize for their initial doubts and to offer their continued support. But the most satisfying moment came when I saw two uniformed police officers enter the auditorium. Ellen had coordinated with law enforcement to be present for Brian's inevitable public confession, and they were ready to take action based on the evidence that had just been presented. Within days, the consequences of Brian's public exposure rippled through every aspect of his life. The State Bar Association launched an immediate investigation into his conduct, leading to his disbarment and the loss of his law license. His legal practice collapsed as clients fled and partners distanced themselves from the scandal. Margaret and Donald, caught up in the fallout from their son's criminal behavior, found themselves social pariahs in their own community. Friends stopped calling, invitations dried up, and the comfortable social standing they had enjoyed for decades evaporated overnight. 6 months passed after Brian's public disgrace, 6 months of blessed peace, and continued success with our garden project. The scandal had actually increased community support for our work, with donations pouring in from people who wanted to show their solidarity with what I had endured. I had never been happier, never felt more fulfilled, never been more certain that I was exactly where I belonged. But Margaret's absence from my life, while peaceful, had also been suspicious. I knew her well enough to understand that she wouldn't simply accept defeat and move on with dignity. Pride and desperation were a dangerous combination, and I suspected that sooner or later she would make one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her family's reputation. The attempt came on a gray Tuesday morning in late autumn. I was in my kitchen enjoying my morning coffee and planning the day's activities when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Looking out the window, I saw a figure I barely recognized walking slowly toward my front door. Margaret looked terrible. Her once perfect appearance was disheveled and worn, her expensive clothes replaced by something that looked like it had come from a discount store. But it was her face that shocked me most. She looked older, defeated, hollowed out by months of consequences she had never imagined facing. She knocked on my door tentatively, not with the commanding presence she had once brought to our confrontations, but with the hesitant uncertainty of someone who was no longer sure of their welcome anywhere. When I opened the door, she immediately collapsed into what was clearly a rehearsed performance of contrition and desperation. "Helen," she sobbed, falling to her knees on my front porch, "please forgive me. Please give me a chance to make this right. I know I've done terrible things, unforgivable things, but I'm begging you to find it in your heart to show mercy to your sister." The tears seemed real enough streaming down her face as she clutched at my doorframe like a drowning woman grasping for rescue. But I had learned to see through her performances, to recognize the calculation behind even her most emotional displays. I was wrong, Helen. I was so wrong about everything. Brian convinced me that you were trying to steal from us, that you were manipulating Mother in her final days. I should have trusted my own heart, should have remembered how much you sacrificed for our family. Can you ever forgive me? She continued her tearful confession, weaving a narrative that painted her as another victim of Brian's manipulation rather than the architect of my torment. According to her revised version of events, she had been misled by her son's legal expertise and had acted out of misguided loyalty rather than greed. But even as she performed her act of contrition, I could see her eyes calculating, searching for signs of weakness or sympathy that she could exploit. And sure enough, as her sobs began to subside, her true purpose began to emerge. "Helen, I need your help. Not just your forgiveness, but your actual help. Brian's legal troubles have destroyed our family financially. The lawsuit settlements, the legal fees, the loss of his income. We're facing bankruptcy and foreclosure. I know I don't deserve your kindness after what I've done, but you're the only family I have left." She looked up at me with what she clearly hoped was an expression of vulnerable sincerity. "If you have any resources, any way to help us rebuild our lives, I promise I'll spend the rest of my days making up for the pain I caused you. We could be sisters again, real sisters the way Mother would have wanted." The manipulation was so transparent, so pathetically obvious, that I felt nothing but cold disgust for the woman kneeling on my porch. Even in her moment of supposed contrition, she was still trying to exploit me, still calculating how to extract money and resources from my success. I looked down at her with complete emotional detachment, feeling neither anger nor pity, nor any remnant of the sisterly love that had once bound us together. That love had died under the weight of her cruelty, and nothing she could say or do would ever resurrect it. "Margaret," I said quietly, my voice carrying the calm finality of someone who has moved completely beyond the reach of manipulation. "You seem to be confused about something fundamental. You're not my sister. You stopped being my sister the moment you chose to see me as your enemy rather than your family." I stepped back from the doorway, creating physical distance that matched the emotional chasm between us. "You didn't just hurt me, Margaret. You tried to destroy me. You forged legal documents. You turned my own daughter against me. You had your son vandalize my property and call me mentally incompetent. You declared me dead to you and threw me out like garbage." Her face began to crumble as she realized that her performance wasn't working, that the old Helen who could be guilted and manipulated was gone forever. "You erased me from your life when it suited your greed." I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You made your choice then, and now you have to live with the consequences of that choice. Find your own way, Margaret. Find your own resources. Find your own family, because I am no longer any of those things to you." I stepped back and began to close the door, but Margaret made one last desperate attempt to force her way back into my life. "Helen, please, I'm your sister. We grew up together. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore?" "No," I said simply, my voice as final as a grave closing. "It doesn't. You killed that relationship with your own hands, and I'm not interested in resurrecting what you destroyed." I closed the door firmly and locked it symbolically, and literally shutting her out of my life forever. Through the window, I watched her sit on my porch for several more minutes, perhaps hoping I would relent, perhaps simply processing the reality that her last desperate gambit had failed completely. When she finally stood up and walked back to her car, I felt Ellen's hand on my shoulder. She had arrived as planned, carrying the legal documents that would make Margaret's banishment official and permanent. "The no-contact order is ready to be served," Ellen said gently. "She won't be able to approach you again without facing criminal charges." As Margaret drove away, disappearing from my life, for what I knew would be the final time, I felt a profound sense of completion wash over me. The war that had started with her cruelty and greed was finally truly over. I had won not just the legal battles, but the deeper war for my own soul, my own worth, my own right to live in peace. Today, as I sit in my beautifully restored home, surrounded by the laughter and friendship of my garden project family, I can barely recognize the broken woman I was just 2 years ago. My house, once threatened with foreclosure through Margaret's fraud, now serves as an informal community center where neighbors gather to share meals, plan projects, and support each other through life's challenges. The garden project has expanded beyond anything I originally imagined, with similar healing spaces now flourishing in 6 neighboring communities. I spend my days mentoring other seniors who have faced family betrayal and financial abuse, helping them find their own strength and voice. My evenings are filled with the peaceful rhythm of my sewing machine as I create quilts and blankets for the homeless shelter, my arthritic hands finding new purpose in acts of genuine service. Most remarkably, Sarah and I have begun to rebuild our relationship. Her recovery from addiction continues, strengthened by her growing awareness of how Margaret's family manipulated her during her most vulnerable moments. She has apologized repeatedly for the pain she caused me, and while our relationship will never be exactly what it once was, it is growing into something honest and healthy. The transformation within me goes deeper than these external changes. I have learned to value my own worth, independent of anyone else's approval or rejection. I understand now that love given freely is beautiful, but love demanded or manipulated is worthless. I have boundaries that cannot be crossed, standards that will not be lowered, and a sense of self that no longer depends on other people's validation. The lessons I've learned through this painful journey could fill volumes, but the most important truth is this betrayal wounds deeply, but it also reveals strengths you never knew you possessed. When people show you who they truly are, believe them the first time. Protect your heart fiercely, but never stop shining your light in the world. True peace comes not from others' love, but from embracing your own inherent worth, regardless of who chooses to reject or accept you. As I sit here this evening working on a new quilt that will soon warm someone who has nowhere else to turn, I find myself wondering who else might rise from betrayal's ashes to discover their own unshakable strength. My stitches hold firm and true, weaving together scraps of different fabrics into something beautiful and useful. And just like my quilting, my hope for others endures stitch by careful stitch.